Hello, YouTube. This is Mage Power coming to you once again. This is the second version of the Build Your Own deck. This time it's a deck that if you've been to my streams, obviously twitch.tv/Mage Power, it's right up here. You've seen me play this deck quite a bit. It's a deck I do enjoy very much. This is Code Talkers. One of the benefits of Code Talkers is that they are primarily an extra deck archetype, so therefore, as far as main deck cards go, you're pretty much free to play whatever you want, with the exception that most of the cards are probably going to be Cybers monsters. So that's really the only restriction, is that you do get Cybers locked because of cards like Transcode Talker, saying that you can only special summon Cybers monsters that turn. So I'm going to jump right into this because I have a lot of cards, because you can play a lot of different possibilities, and I know there's multiple different strategies to playing Code Talkers, but I'm going to tell you how I play this deck, and obviously I'll tell you about how some of the other people play it, but it's not how I personally like it. And, obviously this being a build your own deck, I'm not going to tell you how to build it. I'm going to tell you what I enjoy and what cards I suggest, and I'll also give you some of these other options that I know other people do enjoy playing. So, starting off, the whole idea of Code Talker is that you're going to need Signet Codec. Codec is a very powerful card. Basically, every time you summon a Code Talker monster of a different attribute, you can search your deck for a monster of that same attribute that is a Cybers monster. So if you summon a Dark Code Talker monster, you can add a Dark Cybers monster from your deck to your hand. And then later that turn, if you summon a Wind Code Talker monster, you can search your deck for a Wind Cybers monster, and it goes for literally every attribute. But you can only search for each attribute once in a turn. So effectively, this is almost a 6 times per turn card, assuming you can summon all 6 different attributes, which you probably won't, but in theory. But so the reason that this is now a 3 of, obviously shouldn't be that big of an explanation. This card is a card you want to see. You want to see it in your opening hand. Seeing this card in your opening hand means you don't have to go out and search your deck and go out of your way to find it. So 3 of this, even seeing this in multiples in your opening hand, if you see 2 of this, that's still better than seeing 0. 100% of the time. I would rather see 2 of this than 0. I would rather see 3 of this than 0, assuming I still have other usable cards in my hand. I wouldn't like seeing 3, but it'll happen once in a blue moon. That's just what happens with playing multiples of cards, especially cards that are hard to use in multiples. The other thing about this card is very searchable with a card called Microcoder. Microcoder, some people might know it as Microcoder, I know, as John from Zodiac likes to say. This card, basically, you can link summon using it from the hand, and if you do, you can add a Signet spell or trap, and Codec just happens to be a Signet spell. So you make sure that you play 3 Microcoder. You also want to play ways to get to Microcoder, such as Signet Mining is a good option. Another option that I used to use a long time ago that I stopped playing because it's a little inefficient is Signet Backdoor. This card, basically, you target a Cybers monster on the field, banish it, add 1 with a lower attack. Microcoder being 300 attack means that it's searchable by banishing almost anything. Almost anything. But, like I said, that's a little inefficient that way, but it's still an extra way to do it. Another one that is a very easy way to get to it. 1 for 1 is another option. You are playing other level 1s in the deck, so 1 for 1 is really not terrible in this deck. It's not a card I play, but it is another option that I do suggest that you try out for yourself. Anyways, moving on, because we definitely need to get into some of these search options and other staples of the deck. Like I said, so this being an extra deck archetype, so let me go through the extra deck first, so this makes a lot more sense for those of you who aren't familiar with the deck. I do play an instant fusion target, so instant fusion does have a target in this deck, so it's what I like. I personally like this over one-time passcode is another option that you can play. I don't play it. Basically, one-time passcode gives you a 2,000 token, but you can only activate it once per turn. But with instant fusion, you can instant fusion for Diplexer Chimera. Diplexer Chimera is 2,000 attack, and it gives you a monster that you can use later on if you really had to. It's, it probably could go either way, but Diplexer Chimera is the first card in my extra deck. Every other card is a link in how I play. There are some variants that do some synchro things, maybe XYZ things, but I stick primarily to links. So we have Access Code Talker. Obviously, this is the big Code Talker monster. This is essentially the Code Talker boss. I don't think this card, if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh! In the last few months, really needs much of an explanation. He's a dark, so you summon him with the codec face up on the field. You can search for a dark. There's also Code Talker itself. This is the original Code Talker. Although, weirdly enough, it did take us a bit to get him here in the TCG. But he is also a dark. He is your starter. This is the card that you want to get on the field. Search for your dark if you have the codec. Because this is also a dark, this means you can get to your early microcoder or your early dark search or whatever it is that you're doing. We have Code Talker Inverted. Essentially, this card, when it's summoned, you can summon a monster from your hand to a zone it points to. It is a light, so you can also chain block it, make inverted Chainlink 1, assuming you have a monster in your hand, and Signet Codec Chainlink 2 to search out a card such as Lady Debug, for example. Lady Debug, obviously, in any Cybers deck, is a pretty obvious choice to play in multiples, usually at 3. And so being able to search out Lady Debug at Chainlink 2 and then having inverted Chainlink 1, oh, I'm going to search Debug and then I'm going to slap it on the field because inverted says special summon, and I'm going to search for my Lady Debug, and it's a pretty good way to play that. There's other cards to play in that scenario as well. I'll get to those later. Then we have Xcode Talker. Xcode Talker, this is your wind code talker. You're most of the time going to be summoning this underneath Transcode Talker. And the reason we play this is the card that allows for the U-Link if you're going to be playing that strategy. The U-Link is enabled because Transcode points up, down, and to the side. So the reason that you need the Xcode is this card can actually lock out your opponent's zone that the Transcode Talker points to. And then, obviously, like I said, this being the wind means you can search out for cards that are wind cybers while Codec is face up on the field. And there's not a lot of them, but the ones that do exist are pretty good. One of the ones that you're going to end up really wanting to search, unfortunately, is not legal in the TCG just yet because we have not gotten it, but I will still cover that later on in the video. We have IP Masquerada. This being a Cybers monster means you can summon this, and if you really had to, I don't play Nightmare Phoenix, but I do like this for its protection effect. You can summon this out, and then if you're worried about something that might be destroyed, if you fear they're going to try and destroy your Transcode Talker, you can make Masquerena and then link up into your Transcode Talker, and then they can't actually do anything about it. So it's a good option, and I do like it. I currently am using it. Moving on, we have Lingeribo. I like this card in here. It's not because of really what its effect is, although its effect does come up from time to time. Basically, it contributes itself to negate a trap, so it's actually a pretty good card against back row decks, Paleo, Altergeist, Subterror, decks like that. So it's not bad against them, but it's also almost generic for this particular deck because it takes one level 4 lower Cybers monster. So if you need to get a quick link monster on the board with an arrow that you can summon to, Obviously you could see this points down left. So this is a very easy card for you to just slap on the board, easy to summon, and like it's not bad. It's more of a tutor, lets you go and get out of certain not so great scenarios. That's also why I play Link Kuribo. Link Kuribo, obviously, like I said before, there are level ones in this deck that do like being put in the graveyard. This is another option that I play. I've gone back and forth between playing just one of these, and there become times that I do miss playing both. So I am currently playing both. However, do your testing and, maybe you'll find that you like one better than the other. Then, like I said, we are playing the Masquerena, so that does lead me to play the Avramax. Avramax, being protected by Masquerena, obviously is incredibly powerful, and things that get over it aren't that well, not that viable is the wrong word, but you don't see a lot of decks that play cards to out an Avramax protected by a Masquerena. Masquerena protecting Avramax means you have to get over this, and save for a kaiju, there's just not that many cards in the game. I'm sure you'll let me down in the comment section below. You'll let me know, oh, this card outs it, this card outs that, this card outs it. But my point is like these cards, most of them do not see a lot of play in the game outside of kaijus, and I guess right now also AA Zeus is another one that would out it, assuming Zeus has already been established. But if Zeus has already been established, you're probably playing around that anyways. We have Splash Mage. This is a card I keep debating at playing multiple of. Essentially, it is a once per turn effect, so that's why I've kept it at one for now. But this card, you target a Cyberse monster in your graveyard and you special summon it, but you cannot but you negate its effects and you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except Cyberse monsters. So this you can target. It's essentially a Link 2 Monster Reborn for your deck, and the only thing it can't bring back are Link monsters. Link 2 Monster Reborn. I don't know. That just sounds pretty good to me. I don't know about you, but it's a pretty good card. Then we have Talkback Lancer. This card is pretty much required for the extra link. This is going to be the card that ends it. It's one level 2 or lower Cyberse monster. It's 1200, and it will be boosted 500 by transcode if you do that. If you do the U link that way, essentially it's your link 1 that points downward. That's going to make it harder. Link Kuribo obviously does exist, but it's only 300. Even when boosted, is only 800. Something that gets boosted to 1700, that's a little bit harder to deal with if you don't have access to links against a deck that requires links. So, obviously, I know Sky Striker is not a big thing, but take that as an example. If you summon a Talkback Lancer as your weakest monster at 1700, Sky Striker is going to have a hard time dealing with that with just a ray, for example. Obviously I'm assuming no like afterburners, for example. But then we have Transcode Talker. This is an easy 2 of. Sometimes I've wanted 3, but it's rare. I do like it at 2. This card essentially is your bread and butter of the deck. This is the card that you're going to end up summoning in most situations. This card, when it's co-linked, monsters it points to and itself cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects, and all monsters it points to and itself gain 500 attack, and it is a monster reborn for link monsters as long as you can summon to the zone it points to. So it's really, really strong. Then we have Trigate Wizard. This is a card I've been dabbling with. I do like it, especially at the very least for the banish effect. Ironically, I don't always get to the 3 effect, but the ability to play this, especially going second, being able to use this to break boards, is pretty good. I do like this card. And that's pretty much it for the cards that I play. A couple other options. You have the topologic monsters, or the topologics are cybers, so they're options. I don't personally like them, but worth consideration. Update Jammer obviously is a card Salomon Great used for the OTK with transcode, so it's here for the mention. A few other cards. You have the Arrival Cybersat Ignister. This has the same problem as Avermax, so I figured I'd kind of pick one. Avermax was the easier card to make. And then we have Protocol Gardner and Honeybot. These cards are kind of similar. They're more just protection, sort of lockout style cards, but in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, that's not as great. Then we have Flame Administrator. This basically can boost all your links by 800. So it's a pretty good power up, but I've never found the need really for it. And obviously, I have to mention it because it just got released in the OCG with an errata. Firewall. Firewall is a card that I haven't gotten to test it yet. I I think it'll probably be a welcome addition to this deck, but with how I play, I don't know if that's true yet. So we'll find that out. Obviously, keep updated, and I will let you know how the testing with Firewall does. And then we have Elphase. This card, I mostly played it for its arrows. The fact that it just points up and to the side means it was easy extra link material, but it didn't offer some of that same protection as Transcode, so I currently don't play it. But it's not a bad option. It's really not. And then we have Shooting Code Talker. Shooting Code is the the Water Code Talker. I do like this card because basically it can attack multiple times, and every time it destroys a monster by battle, at the end of the battle phase, you can draw cards equal to the number of monsters it destroyed. However, its links aren't necessarily the best for doing everything. It's not a bad card, but it's not always strong enough to deal with those things to really gain that much advantage. And the water search monsters, like the monsters you actually would search for water, honestly aren't that good. So it's not a card that I play right now. If we get some insane search that I could search by summoning Shooting Code, this might come back into the deck. But as of right now, the best options that we have are Scripton. Basically, this card you banish it, you banish a Cybers from your grave to summon it. You have Code Radiator, which you can use it as link material from your hand, and if you do, you reduce a monster on the field by 1200. So it's just stat reduction. It doesn't do anything else. And then you have Sea Archiver, which is a good monster, but it doesn't do much for you in the hand. You'd much rather have it in the graveyard, and I'll get to how you deal with that later. And then you also have Power Code Talker. This is currently the only Fire Code Talker. However, we have Decode Talker Heat Soul. When this card comes out, this deck will change, and I will update it accordingly. But Heat Soul basically is 2+ Cybers monsters with different attributes, and you pay 1,000 to draw a card, and that plus code or Cynet Codec means you can search for your fire and draw a card and actually get some pretty nice advantage that way. But Power Code is currently the only TCG legal one, and it takes 3 monsters. For what it does, it's just not worth it because we already have the ability to get over big monsters in this deck, which is what Power Code was initially designed to do. Additionally, I should mention there is a Synchro and Ritual version that focuses around Cyber's Wicked. Cyber's Wicked, essentially, you get your tuner off this card, and a lot of people do this with Link Disciple and Link Devotee, using Disciple to tribute Devotee to restack their hand and such. And, they'll draw a card, put one back. Devotee will give them 2 tokens, and they'll use that to go up into Wicked and be able to play out from there. And then sometimes they'll also use Cyber Switch to be able to get to Ritual monsters. The thing I don't like about this is if you do this combo, Devotee locks you in, from summoning anything higher than a Link 2. Which, if you're playing Code Talkers, I'm sure you realize Code Talkers are mostly Link 3s. So, yeah, that's not something I like. Anyways, getting into the main deck. So now most of what's here, we're just looking at cards that you can search off of Codec. So the cards that I like, typically you start with the Earth Monster if you didn't start with the Codec. So some of my favorite targets is Gachiri at Ignister. Basically, you target a monster on the field, or on your side of the field, negate its effects, summon this from your hand, and then you can link summon with this later, and then when it's used and gone to the grave, you target a monster on the field, and it becomes unaffected by your opponent's card effects until the end of the next turn. So you essentially can target a monster that you want to not be able to be affected by your opponent at all, and well, guess what? That's good until your opponent's next turn. That's pretty good. Widget Kid, essentially this you summon this, and then this allows you to summon another one from your hand by special summoning it. And so it's a decent extender sort of card. It's also a decent starter if you open it. I did play this in multiples in the past. Right now I'm only playing one. Part of that is space though. Then we have Code Generator. There is a debate to play more than one of this. However, it being once per turn does make it a little harder to play more than one, in my opinion. But essentially, this, when you use it as link material, and you can use it as link material from the hand, you can send a Cyberse monster with 1200 or less attack from your deck to the grave. And most of the time, you're going to be sending Dotscaper. Dotscaper, when it's sent to the graveyard, you can special summon it. Doesn't matter where it was sent. It has another effect that if it's banished, you can summon it back, but that effect won't come up as much. But you can only use one of those effects per turn, and you can only use each effect once per duel. The other card that I play to send with Generator, in case you drew Dotscaper, for example, because you can only send from the deck with Generator, is the Sea Archiver, which I mentioned earlier. This is how I get the Archiver engraved. This is why I play the Archiver. Basically, Archiver says if you summon a monster to a zone a link monster points to, you can summon this from the grave, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can do that effect from hand, but I would much rather do that from the graveyard, personally speaking. Anyways, from there, usually you're going from transcode, and the next one you're going to be summoning is your X code to lock the zone that transcode points to. And so from there, you're going to be searching a wind. I currently play only 2 targets, and that's Link Infra Flyer. Basically, this card, if you control a Link monster, you could summon it to a zone a Link monster points to. And it's actually, I stand corrected. It doesn't even have to summon to a zone that your Link monster points to. You don't have to control a Link. Just if a zone is pointed to by a Link monster, you could summon it there. And then Parallel Exceed. Obviously, this card, a lot of people know how stupid this card is by now. Basically, if you summon a Link monster, you could summon this to a zone that Link monster points to. Then you could summon another Parallel Exceed from your deck. This card is a 3 of. Easily, this card, drawing it is fine. Searching it is fine. Using it just feels so free, usually. It's such a great card. I basically only play the Infra Flyer at this point as a backup search target because Infra Flyer is just a little easier to get on the field. It's more or less a free extender. And then we have our light targets because we usually go from there into Inverted. So Inverted, obviously, we have Balancer Lord. Balancer Lord, you pay 1,000 and you get an extra normal summon this turn of a Cyberse monster. And then it has another effect. If it's banished, you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand. That effect won't come up very often, but once in a while, it's not bad. It does come up once in a blue moon. And a secondary effect that allows you to extend is pretty nice. This essentially is almost a double extender if you get both effects off. And I don't believe either effect is okay. So the banish to summon effect is once per turn. The normal summon effect obviously won't stack, so that's also technically once per turn. Then we have Four Mud Skipper. Four Mud Skipper is another of those level 1 monsters I mentioned earlier. This card, being a light, also being able to search high level Cybers monsters, means this card can get to your cards like Parallel Exceed very easily. It also can search out the Gachiri that I mentioned earlier. And then I play another card, Degrade Buster, which is a card that can be searched by 4Mud. This card, I almost call it like the Cyber Pseudo BLS. You banish 2 Cybers monsters from your grave to summon this, and then quick effect, you can target a monster with higher attack than Degrade Buster and banish it until the end of the turn. So this being able to deal with certain problems, especially high attack problems. I realize this is 2500, but the other fact that it's a quick effect means any deck that's playing any sort of high stat monsters that loses to some interruption, it's not a bad option. I do very much like this as a tech. Even beyond just in Code Talker, in any Cybers deck, I think this is a solid one of. Then we have Cybers Converter. Converter basically is a level 2 Cybers that can special summon itself, assuming all monsters you control are Cybers, which they should be. I know a lot of people do like Backup Secretary, but part of the reason I play Converter over it is because we do play the Talkback Lancer. Talkback Lancer says level 2 or lower, and Backup Secretary is level 3. So you can use Converter for the Talkback Lancer, but you cannot use Backup Secretary for Talkback Lancer. They essentially are the same card in what they do, though. They're a free extender for you. You have Lady Debug. Lady Debug obviously is your searcher of the deck. This can get to any of your lower level 3 or lower Cybers monsters. I don't think this really needs much explanation because I already kind of explained it earlier. Then we have Cybers Gadget. I play this as a one-of to search it out when the benefit arises of using it. Essentially, this card, you target a level 2 or lower monster in your grave and summon it. And then when it's used as linked material, you can summon a token that's level 2. And so it's essentially going to give you a +1 from the graveyard and then turn itself into a token upon link summon. So it's a very good card. The biggest problem with Gadget, though, is that it has to be your normal summon. If you don't normal summon it, this effect does not work. That's why I don't like this in multiples, because oftentimes you're going to want to commit your normal summon to a card like a 4 Mud Skipper, to a Lady Debug, sometimes even to a Dot Scaper if you open it and not much else. So there are scenarios that you're going to want to commit your normal summon elsewhere, which is when Gadget is essentially a dead card. But being a one of and being very searchable in the deck means that this is a very good card at 1, and maybe 2 or 3 if you really want to test it out. But I like it at 1, it's a very solid card. Then we have Microcoder. This is a 3 of. I went over this earlier. This gets you to all your Signet spell and traps. Usually you're going to get to your codec, assuming you didn't open it. If you did get to your codec, though, you do have the option of going into other cards. And I believe that we are in the darks now. Sorry for that. I switched over from light to dark here. So we have Microcoder. This is going to be your primary dark search. Then we also have Cross Debug. This essentially, if you control 2 or more Link monsters, you could summon this card from your hand. It also has a battle effect where if a Link monster battles an opponent's Link monster, you can banish this card from your grave. Target a Link monster in your grave. Your battling monster cannot be destroyed by that battle. Also, until the end of the turn, your monster gains attack equal to the target's attack. So it's almost an honest for your Link monster from the graveyard. Kinda, not really, but along those lines. So that effect doesn't come up that much, but It might once in a while, but essentially if you control 2 Link monsters, you could summon this card for free. Then that's it for the monsters that I play. Getting into the spells and traps, we have Signet Codec. Like I said, this is a 3 of. We have Signet Mining. This is your spell search. Discard 1 card, add a Cybers. We have Signet Optimization. This is a 1 of. Basically, your Code Talker monsters, when they battle, can't be responded to. Once per turn, you gain an extra normal summon. And this effect will stack with Balancer Lord because Signet Optimization performs the normal summon immediately. And we have 1 copy of Instant Fusion because it's limited. Beyond that, we have Signet Conflict. Signet Conflict is the counter trap. Basically, if you control a Code Talker monster, you can negate the activation of a spell or trap card or monster effect and banish that card, and your opponent cannot activate any effects of that banished card until the end of the next turn. That goes for all copies. So, excuse me, if they have a copy of a card that's not at once per turn, and you banish it with Conflict, they can't activate that second one because Conflict says no. Going real quickly over some other options that I haven't gotten to yet. Most of these are going to be cards that I've either seen played in the past or I've tested it out and thought they were at least alright. We have Datacorn. Essentially, when this is summoned, you summon a token. Armored Bitron, you tribute this card to summon a Cybers from your deck, but negate its effects, and you can't summon for the rest of the turn except for Cybers. Nightmare Corruptor Ibli, this card, I know there's some people out there who will tech this in and do some weird shenanigans, so I had to bring this up just because I know there's certain times that Ibli is relevant, quote unquote. Stack Reviver is a card I used to actually like this card a lot, but it got to the point where it just wasn't always working. This card essentially, when it's used as link material, you target a level 4 or lower monster in your grave that was used alongside it and special summon it. Link Slayer, this is the Cyber Dragon so to speak of the deck. If you control no monsters, you can special summon this card, and you can discard up to 2 cards to target up to that many spell or traps and destroy them. This card I never played, but I know there are still people who will cling to it. Like, this card was like the first Cybers monster I played. It's not bad, but if you don't open it, it's terrible. Swap Cleric. Basically, if it's sent to the graveyard for a linked material, you can have the monster that was summoned lose 500 attack, and you can draw a card. Salamangreat Mole. This card essentially, if you link summon to this turn, you could summon to a zone a link monster points to. It's a free fire extender. When fire monsters do become something that I search in this deck because Heat Soul becomes a card, Mole is a card I would consider alongside Mathmech Addition and Mathmech Subtraction. All 3 of these are essentially free extender cards, but I would probably consider them in the order of Addition, then Mole, then Subtraction. But essentially they're all just free fire extenders and not bad options just in general. As I mentioned earlier, we have the backup secretary. We have Cybers White Hat. Essentially, if you control 2 monsters with the same type, Cybers, you could summon this card from your hand. If this card is sent to the grave as link material, all monsters your opponent controls lose 1,000 attack for the rest of the turn. Grid Sweeper is a tech, and I've actually cited this card in the past. Basically, if you control a field spell, if there's a field spell on the field, on either side of the field, you can summon this card from your hand, and you can banish this card and a link monster you control, and destroy 1 card your opponent controls. So, especially against decks that are very field spell reliant, like Guru, for example, you can just plop this out on your field going second for free, and then link summon off with this, and then put an inconsequential link monster on the board. Something like a Lingeribo or Linkeribo or Talkback Lancer, or you could summon Splash Mage, use its effect, and then get rid of Splash Mage. some of these monsters that you don't necessarily need for them to stick around once you've already used them. You can get rid of this from your graveyard and a link monster that you have on your field and destroy a card. So that hidden city that's on the field that they need so much. Oh, look at that. It can go bye-bye. And we have actually gone so long on this video that I have timed out on Dueling Book. Give me 1 second. I know I saved that deck, though. So, uh, real quick, though, we have Prohibit Snake. I know this saw play in Salamangreat as a way to deal with battle and things like that. I don't think this, for those of you who have played in the meta, need much explanation on this. Code Radiator, I mentioned this earlier, water search target. It's not terrible, but it's not really that great. Scripton is another decent option, but again, no easy way to search it. Clock Wyvern is a wind one that I do like. That the only problem with it, though, is that it can't summon itself. But when it is summoned, you can summon a token. So it does make essentially one monster become two, which that's essentially how I've built this deck, is turning one monster into two monsters, into three monsters. And that's how I've built this deck. Clock Wyvern was pretty good at that, but it wasn't always consistent as far as getting it on the field. We have Defcon Bird as another wind option. You discard a Cyberse monster to summon this from your hand. It's obviously not as good as Infraflyer because Infraflyer can do things for free. And Defcon Bird, you have to discard a Cyberse monster. So it's not bad, but again, it's a neg1 to summon. And then Code Exporter. This is the last card that I haven't gotten to. This card is the OCG wind target that I really want us to get. Essentially, you can use this from your hand to link summon. If you do that, you can target a level 4 or lower Cyberse in your grave and add it to your hand. But if you get Exporter on the field, you can then special summon it instead of adding it to your hand. And the reason why that comes up a lot is because of cards like Splash Mage. So if you use Code Exporter as link material, then later on make Splash Mage and use Splash Mage to summon Code Exporter back, and then link Code Exporter and Splash Mage up for something, say, I don't know, Decode Talker Heat Soul, which we don't have yet. You can then summon back a monster from your graveyard with Exporter. Then off of your codex, search a fire monster like Salamangreat Mole, Math Mech Edition, Degrade Buster, something of that, and then pay 1,000 to draw a card. And in addition to that, already have your Link 4 set up to go into Access Code Talker, or Mech Knight Crusadia Avramax, or Firewall Dragon, or whatever it is you happen to be playing. There's a lot of potential for this deck to improve should we get Heat Soul and Exporter. And I do apologize, this video has gotten very long, but obviously you've seen there's a ton of cards that you can be playing in this deck. And I didn't even talk about playing things, like Nibiru, for example, obviously is a very good card right now. Infinite Impermanence, Forbidden Droplets. There's all these different cards that are really, really good. And obviously you're going to probably be playing a lot of these other staple cards, Ash Blossom, Nibiru, Impermanence, Droll, all these other cards can still fit in here. If you do want to ask me more questions, as I said earlier in the video, follow me up twitch.tv/MagePower. This has been Build Your Own Code Talkers by MagePower. United we stand, in MagePower we trust. Thank you for watching.